I really don't like to overuse the word trauma because we often don't really know what it means. And nowadays we use this word a lot. So today I will tell you how I see it, what trauma is for me, and what I can associate with it. Remember that revisiting these memories is not something you should get stuck in. Healing involves going back to your childhood and reliving those experiences. The next step is to consciously move out of the past, understanding the mechanism and see how things really are will definitely allow you to create a better future without regret. We often use the word trauma in various contexts, making it difficult for us to truly understand its meaning. The phenomenon of trauma and the word trauma can be confusing. So trauma is something that happens too quickly, too intensely, without preparation, too early. People often wonder, what does that really mean? Is everything traumatic? Is my insomnia a trauma? Or maybe my outburst of anger is trauma? Regardless of whether you remember it consciously, your body remembers. And your emotional world does too. Hi everyone, it's me Magda. Thank you so much for listening to and supporting the content I create. Thank you also for being on a consistent path to self-discovery. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I invite you to do so. I also encourage you to leave the review on Spotify about the podcast. This helps me grow and it allows me to create more and more content for you each day. And now I invite you to listen to the episode. So let's talk about trauma. I thought for a long time about what to call this episode. On one hand, I feel that the word trauma is still somewhat taboo. People who should be naming their past experiences or situations as traumatic often do not, because the word trauma is marked by a sense of shame and the perception that it's something huge. They wonder, does this really apply to me? If they didn't participate in a war of experience a tragic loss, they might question whether their experiences are even worthy of being called traumatic. On the other hand, I also feel that we overuse the word trauma. Sometimes I hear people say things like, I went to the cinema and this film traumatized me. And I also said those things. Or I went to the supermarket and it was so crowded, it traumatized me. We use the word trauma so loosely in some cases. And I think that's why it's not easy for us to dwell on this phenomenon and the word itself. So today I would like to answer the question, what is trauma? I will talk about the different types of trauma and the symptoms it brings. How can we recognize in our lives here and now that we are traumatized individuals? I also want to discuss how to work with trauma. Often it's not possible to work with our trauma on our own because we are stuck right in the center of it. And such traumas with capital T, like being cut with a knife, include abuse, rape, natural disasters, wars, the death of a caregiver or a close person, serious accidents, violence, neglect, or drug abuse in the family home. These are traumas that we have no doubt must have influenced a person in some way. There's no question about it, right? But there are also traumas that we can call traumas with a small t, or we can think of them as needless. It's not a knife, these are needless. But if we are pricked tens of thousands of times, we can also bleed out, right? So these small traumas would include long-term relational traumas such as parent who criticize and judge repeatedly, or a parent who is inconsistent, sometimes calm, sometimes screaming, sometimes warm, sometimes aggressive and violent. We often overlook these kinds of traumas, like those associated with abandonment or rejection, or a parent who argues, divorces, or doesn't speak to each other, or lives in consistent tension. Parents who are physically or mentally ill also fall into this category. If, as children, we experience a parent with chronic depression or untreated mental disorders, or parent who is constantly in the hospital due to illness, this can be very hurtful. Of course, all kinds of mobbing and verbal assaults too, but also, for example, being raised away from your parents or being sent to foster care. Because, in fact, and here I will move on to the definition of trauma. The first definition I want to share with you is from Gabor Mate, a wonderful, outstanding definition. So, trauma is not the event itself. It's not the situation itself. It is what this given situation awakens in us and causes in us, what beliefs does it arouse and create about ourselves, about others, about the world. For example, let's say we are children whose dad left our mom when we were 3 or 10 years old. We were small. What beliefs can this experience awaken in us? About ourselves, we might start thinking that it is all our fault, maybe on some deep level. We start to think, okay, something must have been wrong with me. I'm unworthy of love since my dad is gone. And about others or the world. What belief can this situation awaken in a child? Perhaps that nothing in life is certain, not even that your caregiver will be there for you. Every difficult situation can leave a mark on our beliefs. And this is actually what trauma is. Trauma is what awakens in us in connection with a situation that has happened to us. Trauma is something unbearable. And now I will share a few words from Peter Levin and his definition of trauma. Peter Levin, the creator of somatic experiencing, says that trauma is something that happens too quickly, too hard, without preparation, too early. He says that trauma is about losing a connection, losing a bond with yourself, losing a bond with your own body, losing a bond with your family and the whole world around you. Okay, and now I would like to share my own definition of trauma with you. My definition of trauma is as follows. Trauma is everything that changes you forever, after which you are never the same. Trauma is an experience after which something tenses up inside you and remains tense. Trauma is an experience after which something in you dies. Trauma is an experience after which something in you remains in fear. And trauma is an experience after which something in you remains disconnected. Trauma is an experience after which something in you loses faith in yourself, in others, in the world. It's deeply connected to our survival, our emotions, our body, and our instincts. This is my definition and understanding of trauma. It boils down to this. Trauma is not an objective experience. Trauma is a subjective experience based on you, your body, your endurance, your psyche, your spirit. So what is trauma if we sum it up? In what life experiences can you encounter trauma? As Peter Levin said, and even from the level of the nervous system, is everything that happened too quickly, too hard, too much, without preparation. This includes everything from perinatal stress and perinatal trauma, accidents, difficult family events, and parents' quarrels. It's everything that was too much, too hard for our body and nervous system. But trauma is also a bond that was not secure. Trauma can be a bond that wasn't secure, so we look at all homes with insecure attachment styles. Homes with an anxious, ambivalent, or anxious avoidant attachment style where the relationship with the caregiver was not secure. Trauma is also a relationship in which we couldn't feel what we felt, we couldn't be who we really were. In other words, wherever you couldn't be authentic in your family home. This is also traumatic and hurtful because to survive in such a family home, you have to create a semblance of yourself, like survival strategies, right? Masks to keep you going. It's deeply damaging not to be able to be yourself for years and then carry this unauthentic self into adulthood, living with survival strategies and masks. It is deeply damaging to take a non-authentic self into adult life. Trauma is also the lack of presence, the absence of presence, so we are looking at everything that should have happened in your childhood but didn't. See, this is again about these two sides of trauma. Trauma will be what happened and was too fast, too strong, too stressful, tense, overwhelming. For example, trauma can be violence in the family home, but trauma will also be everything that should have happened and didn't. That is the closest that should have happened but didn't, communication that should have happened but didn't, warmth that should have happened but didn't. This can also be traumatic. It can also be traumatic when there is no one present to help us through our experiences and situations that needed a calm, stable parent to contain our emotions. For example, let's say someone teased you at school in the face of this bullying or teasing, or this difficult situation with your peers or even in the sandbox. There was no one to reach out and hand when you cried. There was no one you could turn to, and there was no one to say, I see you. This is also traumatizing. So, of course, trauma, and here we look at this relational trauma, is all the ones that happen within the bond. It goes far beyond homes, where there is violence and drugs, and it touches many homes. So let's talk about how trauma manifests itself. This is interesting and paradoxical because there is no single set of symptoms for trauma. I think that that's why people often push to the topic of trauma side if we don't really know what we are looking for. How can we identify it? Because someone may show their trauma in one way and someone else in a completely different way. Often in adult life, trauma manifests differently in everyone. People wonder, so what is it? Is everything traumatic? Is my insomnia a trauma? And someone else might ask, is my outburst of anger a trauma? Today, I want to show you how wide the spectrum of symptoms of trauma in adult life is. Maybe you will recognize yourself in not just one, but many of these points I will list shortly. So listen to how trauma manifests itself. The symptoms of trauma include all our holisms, like knowledge-aholism, alcoholism, shopaholism, and pornography addiction, development-aholism, and all our addictions like sweet-aholism, food-holism, exercise-aholism, control-alcoholism, where we have a compulsive need for control. This is also a symptom of trauma, where we have low self-esteem. where we feel worthless, where we feel inefficient in our lives, where we have no sense of our own boundaries, all this can be a symptom of trauma. An eating disorder can also be a symptom of trauma. For me, any eating disorder immediately signals trauma. Autoimmune disease. I can relate to autoimmune disease. Then is mental disorders, insomnia, nightmares, problems with falling asleep, flashbacks, and can also be as symptoms of trauma. Flashbacks are part of PTSD, recurrent images or memories that we can't stop. Imagine you are carrying your little baby in your arms, and suddenly a bottle falls and your baby starts crying. By hearing the fall of that bottle, by that bang, by that sound, you suddenly flash back to your childhood when your dad was breaking plates when he was, for example, drunk. Your baby's crying, but you are already somewhere else, in a flashback. That would also be symptoms of trauma. Another symptom of trauma could be isolating oneself, not engaging in relationships at all, not socializing, emotional outbursts, shooting, reacting inadequately to various situations, but also dissociating, flying away, feeling unreal. We might see this in a close person. For instance, when we say something to someone and they seem absent, where is this person away? We can talk for 5 minutes, tell a whole story, and suddenly they snap back and say, "Oh, I'm here, so?" And where have you been? Where are you gone for 5 minutes? A constant feeling of being overwhelmed would also be a symptom of trauma. But so would chronic fatigue, for example. A feeling and conviction that the whole world is difficult, that the world is bad, that people are bad. A symptom of trauma would also be entering into such repeated, difficult patterns that we cannot get out of and are not aware of. That would also be a symptom of trauma, but a symptom of trauma would also be a life full of limits. That is a life full of limitations. If we have big limitations in life, this can also be a symptom of trauma. Imagine this situation. We have a child who experiences very difficult love, for example, from his or her mother. This love is unpredictable, different every day. Often it is not there at all. Often the mother turns away. Often the mother is there, but no matter what, she is absorbed in something of her own. And the child is left with the conviction that they are bad, that they are not worthy of attention or love, that relationships are not safe, that getting involved in relationships is not safe, that you never know what will come from the other side. Based on this childhood experience, such a child, whether a woman or a man, can enter into their partnerships or relationships in general with the conviction that it is better not to get involved in relationships. You never know what will happen on the other side, right? Or, for example, they might enter into a relationship with the belief that they have to prove and show they deserve love and attention just as they tried to when they were a child. Look at what kind of beliefs these are, what kind of rigid image of reality they build. See how much these beliefs limit life. It is better not to get involved in relationships. Am I unworthy of love, or do I have to prove that I deserve love? what a rigid life this is, how many limitations there are, how much lack of trust, how much tension, and also from my own experience, the constant need to chase something. How much pain. So how many limits are there? This is also a symptom of a trauma if we have life full of limits and beliefs that restrict us. This is often related to trauma. And of course, a symptom of trauma is also limited ability to react. And here is my question to you. Do you feel in your life that you choose your reactions, or do your reactions choose for you? For example, if you are driving on the road and someone cuts you off, do you choose your reaction or is it automatic? If someone cuts in line in front of you, do you choose your reaction or is it automatic? If your child spills a glass of water, and this is great example of me, of my childhood, not only childhood but also adult life. So if a child spills a glass of water, do you choose your reaction or is it automatic? If your, I don't know, husband, boyfriend is 10 minutes late for dinner, do you choose your reaction or is it automatic? Do you choose your reaction? Let's stick to the example where your boyfriend is 10 minutes late for dinner. Do you see that you have different possibilities for reacting? You might ask, for example, why didn't you text me that you were going to be late? Or you could ask, did something happen that made you late? You might also say, how was your day? Do you remember what time we agreed on? Alternatively, you might yell, right? That would be automatic, yelling. You might say, you never are at the time, you always blah 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 blah. So when your child, let's go back to this example, throws a glass off the table, is your automatic reaction to say, what are you doing? Be careful, didn't you see the glass here? Yes, it is almost automatic. The reaction reacts for you. Do you see that you have a choice? You can tell your child nothing happened, or oh dear, I will help you clean it up, or oh, it's a mess, but isn't the glass broken, right? You have many possibilities for reaction, but when we are stuck in trauma and therefore also stuck in certain beliefs and reactions that are only available to us, it seems as if we have no access to other scenarios and no access to other reactions. This is a limited ability to react. So reacting in the same way over and over again in a difficult way is also a symptom of trauma. Okay, so let's talk about this now. Let's answer the question why we don't want to work with trauma. And often we don't want to work with trauma because we deny it. When someone tells us, for example, hey, listen, don't you think you might have an issue here? We are the ones talking, but what topic? No, not at all. Did I have the perfect family home? Absolutely no topic. Knock yourself on the head. What trauma? Not me. What traumatic childhood? Not mine. What hearts? Not me. What psychotherapy? Certainly not me. I don't need it. I'm not abnormal. I'm not going anywhere. Everything is fine with me. I had a good childhood. And my parents are the best. Of course, they are in some point. Our parents are great. They did what they could. But be honest with yourself. So often we simply deny it. It is also often the case that we don't want to work with trauma because we don't remember, and we take this as a limitation. So when someone tells us, hey, listen, why don't you work with it? Or even we can already see that there is something to work with in this earthly life of ours. Here and now, we see that something is off, but we stop to think about it and have a moment of, damn, but I don't remember anything until I was 16, 15, or 17 years old. What will I go? What will I tell? What am I supposed to work with since I don't remember anything? It is as if there is nowhere to go. So we often take this as a limitation, and from this level, we don't want to work with trauma either. And finally, we often don't want to work with trauma because it hurts, because it will hurt. I often hear it from you. I often felt it as well. And every therapy has one direction. Each therapy has a direction towards pain, totally. But it is such a growing pain, or as someone says, it is a good pain. We go to the therapy for good pain. And we all go to work with ourselves, to workshops, to the therapy, to psychotherapy. We are all going in such a way that when I allow myself to experience this pain, I allow myself to name it, to live it, to process it, that there is something waiting on the other side that will be me, but the real me, the totally real me, because we all know that when we function in the trauma of being unprocessed, unnamed, unnoticed, uncared for, we are functioning in some kind of attempt, a daily attempt to circumvent something that is already ruling us. And this is a bit about our cleverness. We think that we are clever because we will not go to work with the past. We will not go to work with trauma. I'm so clever and clever because thanks to that, I will have a slack and a good life now. And it's not like that. We think that we have control over the situation because we control our feelings, but in fact, it is the trauma that controls us all time. And here we could ask ourselves a question: why do we come out of trauma? Why should I recover from trauma? Where is the profitability there? So profitability is in relation to each other. This is also the first thing that will start to change the relationship with oneself and the relationship with others. The way you look at yourself and the way you look at others, the way you look at the world. You come out of trauma to be able to look at yourself differently, to be able to look at the world differently, from the level at which you will be able to experience yourself differently and experience the world differently. We come out of trauma to be able to connect with our essence, that is, with our purest, truest authenticity. We also want to connect with our agency, with our life leadership. We want to connect with our inner safety because we no longer want to live all the time in withdrawal, or all the time in struggle, or all the time feeling like we don't know who we are, where we are going, why and how, and without the tools to figure it out. We want to feel safe, but we also want to be connected to our inner intuition, our inner wisdom, our inner knowing. So we are really working with trauma and coming out of trauma in order to become truly ourselves on many levels. And what is so interesting is that we don't know life without trauma. If we have been stuck in this trauma for a dozen of sometimes several dozen years, we don't know life without it. Perhaps you don't know life without controlling everything all the time. Perhaps you don't know life without feeling inner tension in your chest. Perhaps you don't know life without constant, daily self-flagellation. Perhaps you don't know life without the belief that you are worthless. Perhaps you don't know life without the conviction that people are bad or that you need to be vigilant. Perhaps you don't know life without suppressing everything inside you. Maybe you don't know this life. And now, the moment we start working with trauma, we begin to come out of it. We start to slowly get to know life without this tension, without this vigilance, without silence and suppression within ourselves. We begin to have access to what was absolutely inaccessible to us before. And this life without trauma is not a life full of lightness and fireworks. It's not like that. A life without trauma is not a life in which you will never feel sad again. This is not a life where you will never feel bad. This is not a life in which you will never experience pain. Recovering from trauma is giving yourself the opportunity to live without what is constant in you. Constant tension, constant distrust, constant edge of a panic attack, constant pain, always new ailments, always tired, always the same patterns in life, always the belief that you are worthless, that others are bad, that life is unfair, and they are constantly, all constantly. Recovering from trauma allows you to end what is constant and still so difficult in you. And when we work with trauma, it is somewhere at some point, and it is similar in systemic constellations, that at some point in everyday life, even in the prose of life, we just discover, damn, I went out to people or I went out to friends, and usually I had such a tight throat, my chest, I couldn't speak, I was all ashamed. I preferred to isolate myself. I was thinking all the time about what others thought of me. And today I went out with my friends. It was fun. I spoke. I had a good time. Wow, I didn't even care what others were thinking about me. I just said what I thought. I just spoke. And that's how we come out of trauma. Normality. Health simply become fanfare. What we have always wanted to have just appears and becomes our new normal. Okay, next question. How do I know what to work with? How do I know what to address? I always say that we want to work with what stands out for us now as a conflict, as an internal conflict, as a problem or as an effort. We always start working on ourselves from what is presented today as a crisis. Therefore, it is worth collecting some research about yourself. And I would like to leave you some questions here today. Although I know sometimes we don't even need to collect this interview about ourselves because we know exactly what is screaming and demanding our attention in our life here and now, today. But if you want, I will leave you a few questions, and if you want to answer them, I invite you to do so. So, what are my dominant thoughts and beliefs? Do I react adequately to situations in my life? How is my body? What is my relationship with my body? What kind of life do I lead and what kind of life do I live? How many internal conflicts do I carry inside me? How often do different parts of me clash inside? What are my repetitive patterns? What comes back into my life again and again in the same pattern? And how do I react to it? So these questions will allow you to discern what may need to be taken care of. And I wanted to give you a few examples from my life of how my trauma spoke, because as soon as we open our eyes and open our hearts, we allow the trauma to speak to us. Then we will hear it. So when I returned to my family home and my dad came for the weekend, our mechanism, I mean mine and my brother's, was that all the dishes had to be washed no matter if one of us had something going on or how our day went. His obsession, my dad's obsession with dishes in the sink or something not being in its place, like an extension cord I took from the garage or whatever lying elsewhere, and he couldn't find it. He is a very visual person, so he remembered everything precisely, observed everything, overly controlled things that didn't require such control. This obsession brought tension to most of my family, such verbal tension, after which we knew, even as adult children, that we were doing it mechanically, just not to trigger that, just to avoid his facial expressions, giving us the impression that something was wrong again, that those fucking dishes weren't washed again, that the fucking extension cord was in a different place, that again, I don't know, insert anything. Such things you endure for years, sometimes 25 years, sometimes 30, sometimes in a marriage you endure 30 or 50 years, because only later you recognize what mechanism someone's sick demands trigger in you, someone's lack of ease, that for someone it's more important whether the dishes are washed than, I don't know, you're experiencing your first breakup, or at the moment you have the other important problems, or you simply didn't feel like it. And it was like that. Now I see how my body tenses up, but the one moment I recognized it and started working on myself was a few months ago, when I automatically went to wash those fucking dishes again because I heard him coming home. When I looked at those dishes with a clear awareness of what automatic reactions it would trigger in him, and with curiosity about what reactions it would trigger in me, I left them and didn't wash them. However, I felt a very strong somatic reactions, and knowing how it will be, my throat became dry because it was hard for me to express opposition. But to explain again why I didn't wash those fucking dishes, I started to be in such a state of alert, listening with strained vision, hearing, reading his brief, observing facial expressions. And that moment of silence before he said, it didn't escape his notice. Okay, my heart began to pound when the freaking discussion started, which I wouldn't win anyway, because after all, I'm in his house. I left the room or the kitchen and completely didn't react to his words for the first time. And when I went to my room alone to get in touch with what was going on inside me, I took the liberty of naming what was inside me one by one, and allowed myself to be asked how old I was when it started. How far back does everything I am experiencing now go? And in this specific situation, I was immediately taken to the picture when I actually never experienced it, complete relaxation in his presence. I always had to be in alert mode, just to make sure his facial expression was okay. I always had to be in that obedient child. Because what? Because obedient children deserve love, attention, and if they oppose, they don't. How can you shape your character in the world if you were not allowed to express anger once? I don't know how much time passed in this room. Maybe it was 15 or maybe it was 20 minutes. Nevertheless, it triggered his mechanism, and I consciously interrupted mine. Anyway, I was able to go back there, but only because I stopped it by my need. Because there was a kind of flashback. Only it was a flashback not from memory, but it was a flashback from the body. So I was at the level of the body, from the level of the body, in exactly the same panic. And our trauma can show itself in this way, in such a way it can call us. Like, hey, please look here, look at this place because your body remember it. I told you at the beginning that trauma is very much about instinct. Trauma is very much about emotions. Trauma is very much about survival. So the language of trauma is the language of feelings, and often not the language of history, but the language of body, sensations, and emotions. Another example of such a trauma that resonated with me in my life, which was very interesting, it was so unexpected for me. So my ex-partner, every time he sent me a text message with the title, "We need to talk," or "Magda, I have to tell you something," it was me. I just had such strong reactions from my body. I was getting hot, stuffy, heavy. I had the feeling that I was turning red, frustrated, purple. These two sentences triggered me like crazy. "I have to tell you something," or "Magda, we need to talk." And when I started to sit with it, because it was so panicky for me, so panicking, when I started to sit with it and ask myself, "Magda, okay, how far back does it go? How old are you this year? Where do you hear these words? We need to talk." This fear and this panic awakens in you. And there is, in this tension and this panicked fear, in your whole body. And it immediately appeared to me. It showed itself to me immediately, but this time not with an image, but with a sound, a sentence, with the tone of voice. So these text messages from my ex, "I have to tell you something." And even if it was like, "I have to tell you something that's good news," it took me to the worst possible scenario anyway. He has to tell me something. So what will it be, right? What will it be? It will be, I don't know, something bad. And it took me to other situations at all, you know? There were a lot of arguments in my family, a lot of different family affairs, so we need to talk. We need to talk. I freaked out. We need to talk. So you will have a bad time. We need to talk so you did something wrong. We need to talk so you are angry. We need to talk so you are fault. We need to talk so it will be bad. Now the only question is where, what, how, with whom. So when my ex wrote to me, "We need to talk," then I had this, holy shit, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Where was I to blame? What could I have done? What could I have overlooked, right? We don't have to remember. If you have information from your body, or if you have information from your emotions, these are also fragments of your memories. We have explicit memories, conscious memories, and this will be all the stories we remember, right? People, faces, etc. But we also have implicit memories. The implicit memory will be the memory of the body. The implicit memory will be the emotional memory. And the language of trauma is the language of feelings. So you don't need to tell me or anyone else, anybody else, any other person working with trauma. You don't need to tell stories. All you need is a person who can work with other pieces of memories, with the body and with emotions. And do you know what is also interesting? Such an example would be my friend. He no longer remembered part of his childhood, but also with a safe therapeutic relationship, and with the right modality, with the right tools, we start to remember. And it will start to come back to us. For me, it was meditation. I hated those all repressed memories, and it just came to me. It showed me, like, clearly. So sometimes it doesn't come back to us again, as a beautiful, coherent image. Sometimes a sentence comes back to us, a timbre of voice, a smell, a memory, a view of home. Something comes back. But why is it coming back? Because it can safely show itself, because they are taken care of, because they are in a safe space, because they are with a safe therapist. Our body, our brain, our memory is not stupid. It is not stupid if we don't remember something. We don't remember because there is nothing to remember. We don't remember because we had to focus on something else, perhaps on survival, for example. That is why we don't remember. Or there was so much tension and so much stress that we just had to throw it out of the system. These memories had to be thrown out of it because they would have crushed us, they would have killed us if we remembered them. And the next step, when we have discovered this history, memory, or feeling in the body, or this emotion, once it is deepened, then the next step in working with trauma is, of course, the element of healing, the element of some kind of renegotiation. And it doesn't. This present therapist or guide who loves you with his presence smashes your conviction resulting from trauma into millions of pieces. It challenges these old beliefs. It challenges these beliefs that were created on the foundations of trauma. No, you are not alone with everything. And no, your emotions don't overwhelm anyone. They don't overwhelm me. This is what the present, authentic, loving therapist in space is telling you non-verbally. This tells you non-verbally. And this is the relational factor that heals a lot. I'm not alone here, not alone, but with you, and you see my pain, you experience it. Dear therapist, you experience it in this space with me. You are in this pain, you respect my space of pain. And I can show myself with this belly on top, and nothing threatens me. And this is very, very powerful healing element. I will tell you here right away what therapies work with trauma and which therapies are worth going to if you want to work directly with trauma. Definitely EMDR, psychotherapy. Definitely brain spotting psychotherapy. Definitely EFS, internal family system. All manual therapies, especially manual therapies, those related to manual therapy, are especially somatic experiencing therapy, neurofeedback. These are modalities that know how to work with trauma. System settings. I would say yes, system settings, absolutely. Okay, now I will answer the question. Does trauma always stay in the body? Always, always. There are no exceptions to this. It doesn't have to be medical trauma or physical trauma for it to stay in the body. Trauma is a psychospiritual and physical experience. There are no exceptions to this. And is a psychotherapeutic conversation enough? Conversation is often not enough. And now why? Because this element of discharge is important. This element of discharge is very important, and it is important that the person we are going to know how to work with trauma, which is also stopped at the level of the body. Like I said at the beginning, trauma is strongly connected to our survival, strongly connected to our instincts, and strongly connected to our emotions. If it is connected to our survival, it is connected to the reptilian brain. Yeah, and many psychotherapies don't even touch the reptilian brain. It doesn't even touch the reptilian brain, but rather many psychotherapeutic currents are based simply on the prefrontal cortex. That is to analyze everything, to understand it, to name it, to embrace it linguistically, to embrace it cognitively. And we in trauma, we work with trauma. We also need to deal with the reptilian brain at the limbic system. We also need to enter the language to feel the language of emotions. Now we move on. Can the arrival of a child hinder the trauma healing process? This is a very interesting question. It stopped me a lot. So, can the arrival of a child hinder the trauma healing process? As for me, accelerate. And I'm just begging you, don't go into parenthood from the level, okay, if it is to speed up the healing process, then I will be parent. No, please, this is not good intention. But it can definitely speed up your process. And why? Because the child triggers a lot of things and shows us in black and white what we have a problem with. Especially, the first thing this child will show us is how we are with the subject of bonding. And I mean, what attachment styles we function at. So, what attachment styles are we able to give our child? This will be the first thing that child will show us. The child will show us how we are with closeness, how we are with warmth, with giving, with intimacy, with maturity, with responsibility. The child will show us how we are in the subject of partnership, how we are in the subject of dependence and independence, how we are in terms of self-esteem. The child will show us everything, everything. So I absolutely wouldn't say that a child makes things difficult. And finally, this question that has been repeated many times, and I think I have already answered it here as well. What if we don't remember? That's nothing. This is a certain illusion that you don't remember. It is a certain belief that you don't remember. A part of you remembers. A part of you was in that family home. It was in the middle of that drinking. A part of you was there when you were sent to your grandmother and separated from your mom. A part of you was there when you had that crash or that bike accident. A part of you was there and remembers your body or remembers your emotional body. If not your explicit memory, your conscious memories. All panic attacks are a certain memory from the past and a lump in the throat and dry throat, and insomnia, and chronic fatigue, and problems with falling asleep, and nightmares, and sweating, and being vigilant all the time, and the feeling that I can't leave the house because my body is blocked, or the feeling that I can't feel my body. These are all parts of memories that you can work with. We go to life, we go to people, we go to relationships with all our traumas. They are with us all the time. If we look at the origin of the word trauma, that is, we look at woundedness. In other words, we go out into the world with all the wounds. And with wounds that are healed and with wounds that are not yet healed at all. So we are looking for our memories. We want to start from the place of memories which we do not have so far open. So, dear listeners, start from here and now. from what is happening here and now. Inadequate in your feelings, reactions, emotions, thoughts, beliefs, from all that is happening inadequately now here. From this, you will enter the past. And you don't need to wonder how and when and from where and when am I supposed to know and how am I supposed to know, but I don't remember it. It is going to be all connected and it is all going to be clear. Start is a great friend in the context of working with trauma, and this is what Bessel van der Kolk talked about, is writing. Take a piece of paper, take a pen, write, and write. So Bessel van der Kolk describes something like this. Take a piece of paper, take a pen, sit in a room, pay attention to the first thing you look at. For me, it will be, for example, an extension cord. This damn extension cord that I didn't put back in its place after using it. If I'm away for the weekend and my dad, shows up and the extension cord isn't in its place, it's going to be a huge deal. So there will be nagging, the same topic over and over again about something as trivial as an extension cord. But for someone, it might feel like they have to control you, like you must do things a certain way. So really, it's this small world that constantly creates tension. So observe yourself. What feelings did you have at that moment? What does that extension cord or lamp or whatever represent to you? Or if you look at the lamp, for example, what does the lamp do? What memories do you have with it? Observe your bodily reactions, how you felt then, and what it brings up in your body now. How do you feel? What are your stress responses and what is your body telling you? It could be a lamp or it could be something entirely different. It could be a conversation, being in the kitchen with your parents or another caregiver. How old are you at that moment? Because all this content that we have in us, it is so terribly heavy. I don't know. For example, our panic attacks or what overwhelms us so much. So when we write it down on a piece of paper with a stream of consciousness, without self-control, it starts to be more organized. And it can be said that from this reptilian brain, it is transferred to this prefrontal cortex. But we are also able to see more. So if you write it down on a piece of paper, you start writing, you write for 30, 40, 50 minutes, you will see it. And then you read it. You will see some interesting things. You will learn about yourself. And you will see what stops you, what draws your attention. Maybe there is a word you use all the time, or maybe something stands out from this text. Okay, I hope I have moved heaven and earth for you. This topic, because it is certainly a big topic, and I like to talk about trauma delicately but also concretely, because we have specific questions and we are looking for specific answers. So whether you start tackling your traumas on your own or under the guidance of a specialist, remember to have understanding and patience with it. And it doesn't matter that you don't remember consciously. Your body remembers, and your emotional body too. Thank you for today. Bye!